And we go live. Hi, my name is Siddharth Sharma, and I'm working as a director of digital strategy and transformation. Today, I'm going to talk about the future of digital currencies in Asia. Before I begin, I would like to say that these are my personal views. As we all know, that cryptocurrencies and blockchain is still a very nascent area, and that is still evolving. Institutionalized thinking exists on this topic, but it's very limited. So here I am presenting my individual views with you, and I hope you find them meaningful. In order to ensure that this session makes sense for you, I would like to take you first towards the history of money, how we came where we are, and what is going to change in the future. I believe that cryptocurrencies are money 4.0. We see a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 version of everything, but we have rarely seen a 4.0 version of money till now. And these were long due since the invention of money, starting with money 1.0, which was cash, then credit, which was a form of money 2.0, and of course, money as we see it now, which is the plastic money or the internet banking money, which is money 3.0. However, money 4.0 or cryptocurrencies or digital currencies, as you like to call them, they are also a reset button. They are not just going to reset how money looks like, but also the institutions and the centralized networks that are involved in money, they are going to redefine them. So let's dive in. So let's start from the start of the fiat currency and where it all went wrong. We all know that thousands of years ago, the barter system existed and it had its own limitation of exchange. When somebody who had a goat wanted cow's milk, it was very difficult for them to decide that what portion of my goat or goat's milk should be exchanged for a certain portion of cow's milk. Luckily, humans evolved and they invented money, and as a result, money evolved as a means of exchange, and eventually, it also became a store of value as well. Then, of course, there was invention of credit backed by the assets. If you had a house and you needed some money to do something, then you could always mortgage your house or any other asset that you had, your gold or something, and then you could get money in return for it. And finally, all the money in this world till in the early 1940s or so, in fact till the 1970s, was in a way backed by some kind of asset. We all know that Bretton Woods treaty that happened in the early 1944 or something, and then it's abolished, how it got abolished in the year 1970s, in the early 1970s. As a result, there was no need to keep uh, the money backed by a certain amount of asset. So, what do you think money is? I think we all know that money is a currency that is backed by the government that is behind it, or that is publishing it, or that is printing it. But what we don't understand is without the backing of the government, the money means nothing. Because when initially the concept of money was launched, it was launched with the intent that there has to be an equivalent amount of asset from which money derived its value, and when the asset would go away, the money would go away. But unfortunately, that's not how the system evolved, and that was also important for the growth of the system or money as we know it now. When 1971 the Bretton Woods treaty was discredited or removed, the gold standard ended, and as a result, no government was required to keep equivalent amount of money in its reserve, equivalent amount of gold in its reserves. And as a result, it led to the creation of money, and multiple what should I say, exponential growth in the credit as well. Now this was good for the economy, but this was also bad for the economy because money became institutionalized. There were central banks who took charge of the money, and as a result, there was a lot of indiscreet printing of money. As a result, a lot of challenges ensued. Now, what happened because of this is, since the countries were not required to keep equal amount of gold in reserves, you want to understand that whenever a government needed money, I'm not saying this is true for all the countries. There are still a lot of responsible countries like Singapore government, which maintains a very unique way to ensure the reserves are properly maintained and that Singapore dollar maintains its value. and same is true for Swiss francs as well. But I think it is very difficult to comment the same about US dollars. What happened was that a lot of countries, whenever there was some kind of challenges, it started printing money. And when they started printing money, the value of the money started going down. Now, assuming that you had $100,000 in your bank account 20 years ago, there were a lot of things you could do with that $100,000. But as a result of the money that got printed into the system and it reached everyone, the value of the money that was kept safely in your bank account, it deteriorated or it diminished. Now, this was the problem of evaporating value of the money, and as a result, there were people who were thinking how to solve for this. And I think in 2009, a gentleman or an institution with the label name of Satoshi Nakamoto came, and they proposed an algorithm which, based on the distributed ledger technology, allowed the digitization of money and avoided the problem of double spending. And that's when the digital currencies, which were earlier just thought of as something that are part of the ideal world, they became a reality. And now the trust could be digitized with minimal intervention from humans. Digital assets were possible, and of course, it solved the problem of double spending. We also need to understand that money is a bubble that never really bursts. Now, what happens is, I've already highlighted the point related to inflation. Generally, whatever money that you have kept in your bank over a period of 10 years or 20 years, you might think that $100,000 or $1 million were enough for you, but after 20 years, suddenly that appears to be a small amount. And you continue to work hard to ensure that you always stay ahead of the curve. And then, of course, there are other points related to the human life cycle. So human beings are social creatures, but at the same time, they have this propensity to forget a lot of things. And what happens is that they continue working hard without realizing that why is it that despite working so hard, their money is not producing the results that they wanted their money to produce, or why is their money not so valuable. So while they just stay one foot ahead of some financial problems, but at the same time, this never occurs to them that it could be because of the fact that the value of the money that they have, it is diminishing. And then, of course, the rise in the productivity and so many distractions around us, we get so busy in our lives that we never really question the concept of money. And if you really want to understand digital currencies and blockchain, you will have to understand the concept of money, and you have to understand why money is a bubble that never busted till now. Technology-led deflation. Human beings, we do not worry about the fact that how the value of the cash that we have is reducing, but we are very happy because the smartphones that we are getting or the gadgets that we are surrounded with, their prices are coming down. And we are living in a very narrow world wherein most of the assets which we could have been purchased by cash, they become more and more expensive, while our day-to-day daily gadgets and assets which we spend most of our time with, they reduce in price, and we get a feeling that the world is getting cheaper. But we all know that we are living in a world wherein the value of the money wipes out after every few years. The next point I would like to say is that the centralization of money and regulation. So when you think of money, the images that come to your mind are the central bank, the government, and of course the banks. And we now are so conditioned and used to believe in the concept of centralization of money that we rarely think that any other possibility exists. But the bitcoins and the cryptocurrencies have proven that a P2P decentralized network possibility exists, and they can overcome the regulations that exist around them. The biggest drawback of the money is that no matter what kind of money goals you had in your life and you had saved a lot of money, but the governments can print it, and they are not even required to hold equivalent amount of assets that act as the value of the money that they are printing. Now, there is this concept of helicopter money, the government grants, and they are becoming very popular in the days of COVID, wherein the government is giving the stimulus package running into hundreds of billions of dollars around the world. and people are receiving this helicopter money and the cash, and they are not necessarily spending it, they are saving it. Now, since everybody has a lot of money, while in some cases that does stimulate the money, but what happens is, in more cases than not, it reduces the value of the money parked into the bank accounts or the lockers of the people who worked hard for it. I am in no way against government grants or stimulus packages, but I am very objectively trying to tell you the impact that government printing of money has on the value of the money that has been stored by you or saved by you. The last point I would like to say is that the parallel worlds are funded by it. If you look at the emerging markets, cash still forms a very substantial portion of the transactions. In fact, I was reading the annual investor presentation of both Visa and Mastercard, and both these organizations mentioned that the biggest competitor is still cash in most of the economies. Why? Because cash is so natural and it appears so logical to human beings that they have forgotten that cash is actually a habit that they picked up, and cash by itself does not have a lot of value. But it is a bubble, it is backed by the fiat or the government trust. As a result, people tend to take accept cash as a logical means of payment. So I think once you understand these 5 or 6 factors, and my personal favorites are, of course, how inflation wipes out the value, how human beings forget that cash is a habit, and the fact that cash is not backed by any kind of asset or gold standard, it in itself does not have too much of value. And of course, the centralization and the fact that the things that we are surrounded with on a day-to-day basis, the prices of those technology gadgets go down, but most of the things that we could have bought with money, the price increases, but still we believe that money is something which does not lose value. But money, and I'm going to make a statement, I think that will help you in understanding that money or cash by itself is a depreciating asset, but not many people are able to understand it. Money or cash by itself is a depreciating asset, but not many people are conditioned to view it that way. Now, is cryptocurrency the perfect money? Seems like it. Especially, I would be using the example of Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin, as we know, that there is a finite supply, 21 million Bitcoins to be mined, and supply does not dilute value. Governments cannot print it, and it acts like one global currency with no currency risk. So you can move Bitcoins from one corner of the world to another corner of the world without worrying about the fluctuations in the currency price or changes. Of course, there is a way in which the Bitcoin is actually converted back into the traditional cash or money, but at the same time, it is much less prone to risk compared to other fiat currencies. There's transparency of trust for the first time, in Bitcoins or in DLT backed technologies. Trust is no longer dependent on human, and this is a big point because this can lead to the complete elimination of the centralized networks and the banking system that we are so used to. Yes, the regulations would still be required. Yes, there would be a need for somebody who protects the interests of the retail investors. But at the same time, the dependency on the central banking authorities and the monetary authorities within the governments, Bitcoin greatly diminishes it. In fact, it's a highway that just goes on, that does not even cross any of the centralized paths that have been established. Um and of course, it leads to the creation of decentralized networks, a bunch of computers actually validating the blocks, and as a result, the transaction gets validated. It is tamper proof, nobody can play with it, and establishes the right ownership of asset. And money, for the first time in the human history, acts like a network based on certain set of protocols. And these protocols are not something that a human can play with, or the most powerful country in the world can play with. These protocols are very much based on the digital trust or the programming algorithm that is built into distributed ledger technology. And as a result, crypto is perfect money. I would also like to make a point that there is a reason why bitcoins are often compared to digital gold, in my opinion, and this is my personal opinion. It is even better than digital gold, because gold, still there is certain amount of mining possible every year, but when it comes to bitcoins, the amount is finite. Nobody can diminish the value of the bitcoins that you own by reducing, or by producing more bitcoins. um, it is, if you had, like, let's say 10 pounds of gold, if you want to sell it, it is not that easy. There would be a lot of regulatory hassles involved in it. You cannot carry it through the geographical boundaries of the different countries. As a result, the custom regulations would be involved. But bitcoins are the most fluid money that the world has ever known, and they are, as I said, even better than the digital gold. They are scarce. Yes, there is a lot of fluctuations and speculations, around this topic. But and I'm in no way promoting that anybody should buy Bitcoin or should not buy it. They need to do their own research. But if you just understand how beautiful this concept is, you will become a fan. And if Satoshi Nakamoto were to be a person who were to come out in public, he would definitely deserve a Nobel Prize. I don't know what would be the subject. Would it be economics or would it be product engineering? But the gentleman definitely deserves a Nobel Prize for what he has invented, or what his team has invented, and then uh, name themselves as Satoshi Nakamoto, or used a pseudonym. But the transition would be slow and hybrid. Now, will the world adopt the digital currencies that are there? I don't think so that the adoption is going to happen overnight. Jeff Bezos said that the only real innovation is customer adoption. But having said that, if we go back 30, 34 years, if we go back 30 years, we also realize that this is how internet exactly started. There were a minor number of people who started using it for emails and then for web pages, and now almost everybody in the world knows what internet is, and how to use it. At least 4 to 5 billion people in this world actually use internet. And we are at that stage, in terms of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. I would say that this is the what early 1990s would have looked like, wherein there are a lot of early users and adopters who are moving from the traditional money systems into the cryptocurrency. But as I said, there is a lot of ignorance. Retail investors, they make a lot of noise when the price of Bitcoin actually crossed 50,000 US dollars, then again came back to 30,000 US dollars, and something happened, right? And now it is again back to 40 plus thousand. And then there are a lot of news. The regulators are still not clear what to do with it, because this is such a smart invention that even the regulators are finding it very difficult how to control it. At best, they are willing to come up with blanket bans like China recently announced, but they are not able to understand how to use it. And I would like to make one point here, related to the fact that uh, it is very important to leverage cryptocurrencies and the blockchain technology, or the DLT as we know it. Because if we don't do that, it would be like missing on the next wave, a wave similar to the wave of internet. So the economies that do not adapt to it, they might lose a lot of value creation in the future. Um, the other challenges are, of course, the mining of the cryptocurrency. It consumes a lot of energy, so the clean DeFi infrastructure is still missing, and the controversy surrounding, because this is just the early stage wherein there were news like how Binance to ban the Singapore users from crypto trading. Then the Feds arrested, somebody in the Bitcoin laundering cases, and of course China placed a blanket ban. And NFTs, people are selling for $69 million. A lot of people are not clear on how to digest and what to do with this information. As a result, they stay cautious and they stay out of it. And I don't blame them for this, because it is a tricky subject to understand. But can the governments really stop the cryptocurrencies? If they could, I believe that they would have already done that, because for the first time, there is an invention that is threatening to take away the power of the governments from the monetary system. And the regulators, I would say that they are not just confused, but at the same time, they are terrified that how can they solve for this problem. The reason why it is very difficult to ban cryptocurrencies, because they are already beyond the point of early adoption. A lot of users, more than 100 million users, are cryptocurrency users now. But the fact is that it is difficult to stop or kill cryptocurrencies, because there is no location dependency. A single location, even if it can be raided, it is not going to stop the production or the mining. Second is it does not require a centralized authority. There is, so if you were to ban anything, the most logical way for the government is to find out the authority behind it and just ban it. But it is not possible in case of cryptocurrencies. The customer adoption or consumer adoption has already reached an inflection point way past the proof of concept. Trillions of dollars in market cap. That is a clear proof of the validation behind this concept. Business and institutional backing is there. Every other day there is an announcement by the big business and the credible business and the banks that they are planning to offer crypto trading, or they are planning to offer even their goods in return for cryptocurrencies, and they are going to accept it as a logical form of payment. Favorable use cases and multiple asset classes exist too. So I think for governments, it has now virtually become impossible to control this invention completely. Now it has to live with it, and yes, a hybrid coexistence needs to be figured out. Worst come worst, through the blanket bans and the announcements, mass adoption can be restricted, but the class and the business adoption is inevitable. I repeat, through the blanket bans, governments can scare the retail investors. The mass adoption can be restricted, but the class and the business adoption is inevitable, and that cannot be stopped. So I'll take a few moments just to recap what we have been through. I would say that there is a global validation that already exists. Regulations, no matter how strong they are, they cannot stop it. P2P money network is not a Netscape. I was giving the example of that earlier. If the in the early 90s, we have all heard of Netscape, how it disrupted the music industry. But then the government or the regulators, the music industry leaders complained about it, and of course, as a result, the Netscape company had to be dissolved, and that stopped it. But that changed the music industry forever. At the same time, it's very difficult to stop the P2P money network because the time has arrived. Fiat versus decentralized. Are digital currencies the same as Bitcoin? I don't think so, because even if the countries launch their own CBDCs or central bank digital currencies, as they are called, they may not be finite like Bitcoin. Hence, the very essence of the scarcity proposition from which Bitcoin derives its value, that might get lost. Yes, it is definitely going to be the next version of money as we know it, but still, the CBDCs cannot catch up with Bitcoin. This is my personal view. Class adoption. Billionaires now have an opportunity to keep their wealth liquid, free, and for self. Gold, cash, stocks, and real estate even do not provide that kind of opportunity. So, for the first time, I think almost all billionaires have already taken this step. This may or may not become public, but I'm sure all the billionaires who are invested in protecting their family wealth or the wealth that they have created, they would definitely adopt cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin as the means of store of wealth. Mass adoption. Governments can declare it illegal and restrict masses, but they will be doing a North Korea internet fiasco, as I call it. In North Korea, internet fiasco is that, understand that internet has changed the way the world functions, but North Korea as a country, by restricting access of internet to its own citizens, has done a major disservice to its own economy and to the people of North Korea. So any government that does not participate in building up a blockchain-backed decentralized finance system or decentralized finance network, it may lose out on this big technology wave that has just started in the year 2009, and now I think it is reaching a point wherein the next 10 to 15 years completely belong to blockchain, along with artificial intelligence and platform businesses. So, what is the action that is happening in Asia? I would say that the adoption numbers may be a bit overstated, but they are high enough for use case validations. As we can see that the ownership of cryptocurrency is visible across most of the Asian countries. China is always leading the way within Asia, but then there are other important geographies like Japan, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, India, wherein the crypto exchanges exist and a lot of action is happening. More and more users are trying to explore what cryptocurrency is. Crypto exchanges and the companies exist in most Asian countries. In India, as we can see, Coin, DCX, Zeppay, WazirX, BitBNS, and then of course in China we know so many players, Binance, NGC, and so many other players that are there. And same is true for Hong Kong as well. Singapore, as a country, has been very open to the experimentation with cryptocurrencies, and as a result of the blanket ban in China that came into force on 24th of September 2021, I believe, there is a lot of action that is happening in Singapore. A lot of traders are actually exploring how they can enter Singapore market and continue with their cryptocurrencies and digital currencies forays. Japan, again, is another geography which is very active on cryptocurrencies. There have been some of the scams that a couple of Japanese exchanges were involved in, but I think since then the regulations are bouncing back and they are ensuring that the investors' interests are protected. And then, of course, rest of Southeast Asia, Philippines, which as we will talk, is a very heavy remittance market. So is Vietnam. There is action in Thailand, and there are major exchanges that exist across these geographies. Now, let's talk digital currencies. It is a long road for most Asian countries other than China. So understand that one of the important use cases of cryptocurrencies, or you want to call it Bitcoin or any other. Bitcoin is just one form of cryptocurrency, by the way. But one of the use cases of cryptocurrencies and the digital currencies is the open payment network, wherein they can be used to make any form of payments. Most of the countries in Asia have already declared it illegal for cryptocurrencies to be used as the payment form. Now, there is a pain point behind this. The pain point is that generally there is always a centralized intermediary involved in the payments network that helps in validating the transaction and charges a processing fees for that. In cases of cryptocurrencies, which is a P2P payments network, generally that validation is done by the machines, and as a result, there is no intermediary fee involved in it. And over a period of time, of course, this threatens the very business model or the business foundation of these centralized platforms across these countries, which include big banking systems and the payment companies that exist here. So China's government has declared all cryptocurrency transactions illegal September 21. Digital yuan, is already in the experimental phase, launched in April 21, and there are now the tightening of the big tech regulations. Government is actually working very fast to ensure that the big tech companies, the big bad companies of China, they are regulated in some form or the other. In Japan, Bank of Japan experimenting with the digital currency till March 22. Ethics-driven governments regulations are tight, especially after the Mt. Gox fiasco. Global image hurt by it, wherein millions of dollars worth of bitcoins went missing and they were unaccounted for. So it's very difficult to protect. It was very difficult to protect the retail investor, and as a result, the country is very cautious. In India, RBI digital currency trials are planned for December 21. Currently, it's experiencing a fintech boom. Parallel economy and demonetization woes are still, some of the residue matters. So while a lot of fintechs in India have received funding, but I think the manufacturing sector and the lower middle class and service people are still recovering from the demonetization that happened in 2016, wherein the then prime minister suddenly banned all the 500 or 1000 currency notes. The economy is now coming back on track, but now because of that experiment, the government is very, very cautious about how it should approach cryptocurrencies. In 2018, RBI put restrictions, on cryptocurrency, which were overturned by Supreme Court in 2020, and the current focus is COVID recovery and, of course, the 2024 elections. In Indonesia, there is no real hurry to launch CBDCs. There are 2 million registered crypto investors, the same number of investors in the stock exchange. The number may be a bit overstated, but generally, I would say that yes, there is a lot of interest because in Indonesia, a high proportion of population is middle and affluent class with access to internet, and they are keen to explore how can they leverage the tailwinds of cryptocurrencies. Ban crypto for payments, and this in Malaysia there are no tangible experiments. The government stability by itself is a challenge. Forget about just the monetary authority. or the money stability. Of course, the currency has been stable, but there is a lot of influence of Islamic banking, and the CBDC's experiments are yet to play out. Singapore is benefiting from the Chinese trader exodus and one of the most open and open markets and experiment friendly markets. I to the last count earlier there were 300 plus applications related to the licenses in cryptocurrency. Big banks of Singapore have already announced that they plan to offer cryptocurrencies to the institutions. Uh, and as a result, I think there is this fair acceptance of this amazing invention. Philippines, the remittances account for 10% of GDP, though nearly 80% of Filipinos do not have a bank account, and it's a president-led state. So again, the policies are a challenge, sometimes to understand what should the future of crypto look like in these geographies. Vietnam banned crypto as a means of legal payment, high remittances and inflows. Thailand initially banned Bitcoin in 2013. Since then, the stance has softened. There are 13 plus licenses of exchanges and tested with various form of regulations, including 7% crypto VAT and 15% capital gains tax, and there are CBDC pilots that are happening. So, in a nutshell, as you can see, apart from China, there is very little action across geographies in Asia. Most of the these are not all the countries of Asia, but most of the countries in Asia are still in the very early phases of experimenting with their own digital currencies. But there is a long road for them to go. I think the important point is to also realize that even if these countries manage to successfully roll out their own CBDCs, do they have the same value as the Bitcoin? Yes, it is. These currencies would be very efficient. They would be much more transparent, and they can, put a stop on some of the black money or the money laundering cases. But will they be as valuable as a finite cryptocurrency is? That is definitely to be seen. I think, in my opinion, it will not be. But as a result of this finite Bitcoin that has been created, we will see a lot of innovation that the governments will be forced to think around, and how can they adapt, to the decentralized finance networks. How can they adapt to these new forms of digital assets that are coming up? I think, in summary, I would like to again say that there was this pre-money barter system, and since then there has been various evolution of money. Money 1.0, money was backed by asset. There was limited credit, rise of the central banks, and then of course money 2.0, wherein banking control credit and even influence the business capital availability. A lot of startups would fail when they would not get capital from the banks. Central bank controls the money supply, and central bank is highly influenced by the governments in the region. And as a result, there was a direct involvement of government in the money 2.0, and it's also true for money 3.0. And then of course the money becomes a fiat currency after the abolishing of the gold standard, and as a result, the governments controlled or the grip over the monetary system even widened. Money 3.0, we are seeing, the advent of plastic money over the last 30, 40 years, and the internet-based transactions. There are cross-border payments and banking solutions available. The central banking authorities are still very important, but at the same time, in addition to the banks, there are bigger fintech players like the big tech, the platform companies, and other fintech players that are disrupting the very foundations of bank. Smartphone, cloud, and social-driven banking and payments are becoming the new norm. And these are the establishments or the infrastructure that have paved the way for Money 4.0. But Money 4.0, driven by crypto, is actually a reset for the centralized banking systems. It comes as close as what perfect money can be. Yes, it's easy to get confused by the fact that it could be used for illegal purposes or illicit transactions. But we also need to understand that banking system as a whole paid close to $350 billion plus fine over the last 10 years in the money laundering and the other cases and the scams. So compare that, you will realize that just like any other technology, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. But I think the blockchain use cases, they are more good, and the case to be cynical is less. So focus and study this. So Moneyball 4.0 is all about globally open payments network, wherein any individual in any part of the world can seamlessly send money It's more about P2P, B2B, B2P, P2B, or money movements, free asset conversions, and the rise of the new asset class, wherein the HNIs and the rich folks, especially who would like to their assets to be free from the state's influence, they would definitely adapt to cryptocurrencies. Regulations do exist, but they exist only for safety and security of the retail investors. State influence on money reduces. In fact, it moves to the point of pre-barter system, or wherein or money 1.0, when there was minimal influence of the state in money supply or money related decisions. And of course, decentralized finance network, which is based on the trust created through distributed ledger technologies. The trust is no longer the domain of the humans, it becomes the domain of the computer network, and money no longer just stays an asset, it becomes a programmable protocol wherein people can use money like a network. And as I said, it becomes a programmable protocol. So, what will determine the CBDC's success or adoption? I think governments will have to exponentially improve what cash is. I don't know whether there is any scope in improving what cash is, but the payment and the banking ecosystem for a P2P future, because the future is definitely P2P. I would just like to take a hypothetical scenario. Imagine uh, 500 or 1000 billionaires of the entire world, they decide to park 10 to 20% of their wealth in cryptocurrencies, and now in order to transact with each other, they can do that through the cryptocurrencies without having to move millions of dollars or any other asset through the network, without worrying about the geography they are in, without worrying about the rules of the land. At the end of the day, it is their hard-earned money. I'm not saying that the taxation, the government does not deserve taxation, but I think the government will need a lot of smarter ways to understand that how can crypto tax, become a reality. How to ensure that it is at an optimal point, wherein it's like a bee collecting honey from the flowers, that both the parties gain from it, and they do not worry about state taking too much, or at the same time state does not worry about getting too less. So yes, the digital currencies backed by the governments will be cost effective, and they will lead to bigger inclusion, because a lot of unbanked population with access to the smartphones could participate in that. They would have to think about the entire ecosystem evolution, banking and the payments network, to be ready for a future that is P2P focused and decentralized, and of course the security and protecting the interest of the investors. And last but not the least, the crypto regulations, and the comparative consumer benefits. So, what are the benefits that the digital currencies backed by the government give to these investors? That they cannot get from a cryptocurrency like a Bitcoin. That will determine where the consumers go. I'll just end with the recap alert that yes, Asian governments will have to take this tough decision. Can they allow the decoupling of money from policies or politics? We already know the answer, but I'll let you think. Money 4.0 will evolve as a decentralized network. You are either plugged in or you are not plugged in. It's like a new city coming up with a new currency of its own. With 100 million users, imagine and start viewing Bitcoin or cryptocurrency like a nation on its own, which has its own currency, and the people transact with that one currency. Now, they may be the people of different countries holding different passports, but they are a nation by themselves. CBDCs may help with the prevention of counterfeit money, and they would be cost optimized solutions compared to cash. But will they be as valuable as Bitcoins? I think we all know the answer, but I'll leave that to you. A long journey ahead for the governments to deal with the crypto-led complexity. Honestly, not even many private sector players are able to understand what the future looks like. It takes me hours and hours of study just to understand what DeFi is, how cryptocurrencies are evolving, and how DLT is going to shape the future of finance. I believe that a lot of experts are facing a similar kind of situation, and it's going to be very difficult for the governments, which has so many other things on its plate, to handle crypto-led complexity. So we will see a lot of crypto advisory firms coming up. The HNIs who prefer liquidity, most millionaires and billionaires will not give up crypto assets due to regulations. They have found a perfect P2P asset class, which is even better than gold. So this was my presentation and my 2 cents on the future of cryptocurrencies in Asia. I hope I was able to share some of the ideas around how we have reached where we are and what the future looks like. I think emerging markets, they have a long way to go. In Asia, particularly, I think China, after the cryptocurrency ban, there are other governments wherein they are actually just taking a hint from what is happening there and trying to see what they can do with their own economy. So you can get in touch with me on email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and I would be more than happy on every to answer your questions. I blog regularly, and I do podcasts on the topic of digital transformation and ecosystems to share my personal views. I look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you so much, and it was great to present on this topic.
This is Siddharth Sharma. I go by the name Sid, and I like to talk about digital transformation strategy, ecosystems and platform business models, digital maturity models across industries, startup disruption, and future of technology and work. I run a podcast on the topic of disruption, leadership, change management, and the future of work and business. And I blog extensively on the topic of digital and data ecosystems.